The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria in New York City was packed with the world's most powerful business leaders, tech moguls, and billionaire investors. The annual Global Business Summit had always been a place where industry titans shared their insights, debated economic policies, and set the tone for the world's financial future. But this year, something unexpected was about to happen. Something that would send shockwaves across boardrooms, media outlets, and even political circles worldwide. The keynote speaker for the night was Barron Trump, the 18-year-old son of President Donald Trump. Until this moment, the world had known Barron mostly as the quiet and private son of the former and now present U.S. president. While his father dominated headlines, Barron had largely stayed away from the media, making occasional public appearances but never stepping into the business or political arena. That was about to change. As the youngest speaker ever at the prestigious summit, Barron had been invited as a courtesy, a symbolic nod to the Trump family's enduring legacy in business and politics. No one really expected him to say anything groundbreaking. Most attendees assumed he would offer a few generic remarks, maybe praise his father, and step aside for the real heavyweights. Seated in the front row was Lawrence Whitmore, the CEO of Whitmore Industries, a trillion-dollar tech conglomerate with holdings in AI, robotics, and defense technology. Whitmore was known for his ruthless business strategies and outspoken criticism of the Trump administration's policies, particularly on international trade and corporate regulations. He had publicly dismissed Barron Trump's presence at the summit, even making a sarcastic comment to a reporter earlier in the day. What's next? A TED Talk from a high school kid on economics? Let's leave business to the real players. Now, as Barron walked onto the stage, dressed in a sharp navy suit, the murmurs in the audience grew louder. Some attendees smirked, others checked their phones, expecting this to be a forgettable moment. But the next 10 minutes would prove them all wrong. Barron adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath, and began to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I know what most of you are thinking right now. Why is Barron Trump standing here, addressing a room full of billionaires and industry giants? What could he possibly have to say that's worth your time? The audience, caught off guard by his confidence, fell silent. I'm not here to give you a lecture on economics, nor am I here to boast about my family name. I'm here because I see something that most of you don't. I see an industry at the brink of a revolution, but blinded by arrogance. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People were listening now. Even Whitmore, who had been leaning back in his chair, sat up straighter. Barron continued, his voice steady and deliberate. For decades, this very room, has dictated the world's financial destiny. Your decisions shape the stock market, influence global policies, and decide the future of millions. And yet, with all your power, you're missing one crucial factor: the next generation. He paused, letting his words sink in. Technology is not the future. It's the present. AI, blockchain, automation, they're no longer predictions, they're reality. And yet, the biggest mistake you're making is treating innovation like a playground for the elite, when in fact, the real disruptors are the ones sitting outside these walls, working in garages, dorm rooms, and small startups. The real changemakers don't wear Armani suits. They wear hoodies and sneakers. The room was completely still. Barron Trump, someone they had dismissed as nothing more than the president's son, was delivering a speech that commanded attention. Then his eyes locked onto Lawrence Whitmore. And that brings me to you, Mr. Whitmore. A collective gasp spread through the ballroom. Calling out one of the world's most influential CEOs directly? This was unheard of. Whitmore raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. You once said that AI would eliminate 80% of human jobs and that people should adapt or perish. But let me ask you something. What happens when the people you've ignored for decades decide to rewrite the system? Barron took a step forward. What happens when the young minds you dismiss, the ones you refuse to invest in, don't need your approval anymore? What happens when the next wave of innovation doesn't come from trillion-dollar corporations but from communities of creators, decentralized economies, and open-source technology that outpaces your own infrastructure? The billionaire audience was stunned. This wasn't just a speech, it was a challenge. And it had just begun. For a moment, the entire ballroom felt frozen in time. The world's wealthiest and most powerful individuals sat in stunned silence, staring at the youngest Trump as if they had just witnessed an earthquake. Even Lawrence Whitmore, the towering, silver-haired CEO, who had built his trillion-dollar empire with an iron grip, looked momentarily caught off guard. But he recovered quickly. A smirk crept onto his lips as he leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Interesting perspective, young man," he said loud enough for the room to hear. "But let me remind you, business isn't about sentiment. It's about profit. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as intended." A few chuckles rippled through the audience, mostly from Whitmore's inner circle. But Barron didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded and smiled. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Whitmore. The system is working for you, for the people in this room. But that's exactly the problem." The smirk on Whitmore's face faded slightly. Barron turned his attention back to the audience. "Let me ask all of you something. When was the last time you hired someone without a degree from an Ivy League school? When was the last time you invested in a startup not founded by a billionaire's son? When was the last time you looked beyond your boardrooms and actually listened to the people who drive your success? The consumers, the workers, the real innovators." The room was eerily silent now. "You claim the system isn't broken. But let's look at the facts," Barron continued. "In the last 5 years, we've seen a historic rise in decentralized finance, blockchain-based governance, and AI-driven entrepreneurship. Why? Because people no longer trust traditional institutions. Because the next generation is building its own economy, one that you can't control." The words "you can't control" echoed through the room like a warning shot. And then, with absolute confidence, Barron delivered the blow that no one expected. "And here's the part that should scare you the most, Mr. Whitmore." Barron paused, then locked eyes with the billionaire. "I've already made my first move." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some leaned forward, eager to hear what he meant. Whitmore narrowed his eyes. "Your first move? You mean your father's first move? Because let's be honest, kid, without the Trump name, you wouldn't be standing there right now." Barron let out a quiet chuckle. "See, that's the mistake you and your generation keep making," he said. "You think power is inherited. You think success is about controlling resources, monopolizing industries, and dictating the market. But let me show you what real power looks like." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. Instantly, every LED screen in the room flickered and changed. The giant digital backdrop behind him lit up with a series of live financial graphs, numbers and charts that shifted in real time. "You've heard of Whitmore Industries, of course," Barron said, glancing at the data on the screen. "The company that prides itself on being at the forefront of AI-driven automation. The company that just announced a $2 billion investment in next-gen robotics, designed to replace human labor." Whitmore's expression darkened. He wasn't sure where this was going, but he didn't like it. Then Barron turned to the audience. "What if I told you that in the last 72 hours, a decentralized AI firm, one that Whitmore Industries refused to fund, launched a new open-source technology that could outperform Whitmore's entire robotics division at half the cost?" A collective gasp spread through the ballroom. Whitmore's face tensed. "And what if I told you," Barron continued, "that this firm already has over 1 million users worldwide, all collaborating on an AI system that your company will never be able to own, license, or control?" Now the audience was in shock. Barron Trump wasn't just making a speech. He was announcing a revolution. A murmur spread through the room like wildfire. Some of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the world had just realized something unsettling. They were not in control anymore. Lawrence Whitmore, the man who had dominated the AI and automation industry for decades, was visibly tense. The confident smirk he wore earlier was now replaced by a clenched jaw and furrowed brow. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and stared at Barron Trump with a piercing gaze. "You're bluffing," Whitmore finally said. "1 million users? An AI system that outperforms mine? If such a thing existed, I'd already know about it." Barron simply smiled. "That's exactly the point, Mr. Whitmore. You don't know about it, because you weren't paying attention." He gestured toward the massive screen behind him. You see, while companies like yours have been focused on hoarding patents and locking technology behind corporate paywalls, the next wave of innovation isn't happening in corporate boardrooms. It's happening in open-source communities, in decentralized networks, and in the minds of young people who refuse to play by your rules. The screen suddenly shifted, showing live data from a blockchain-based AI platform, one that had been growing in influence over the past 2 years, but had been largely ignored by major tech firms. The numbers were staggering. 1.2 million active developers worldwide. AI models running at twice the efficiency of Whitmore's latest robotic software. Adoption rates increasing 400% month over month. The audience was stunned. Barron turned back to Whitmore. Your company, Whitmore Industries, just spent $2 billion developing an AI automation system that will take years to deploy. Meanwhile, this decentralized platform, built by thousands of independent developers, has already surpassed your technology at a fraction of the cost. And the best part? It doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to everyone. A few CEOs in the room exchanged nervous glances. Investors started tapping notes into their phones. Some whispered to their assistants, likely giving orders to look into this so-called revolution immediately. For the first time in his career, Lawrence Whitmore was speechless. But Barron wasn't finished. You said earlier that business is about profit, not sentiment. And that's where you've lost touch. Because the next generation doesn't just want profit. We want ownership. We want influence. We want technology that works for us, not against us. Then, in a move that no one saw coming, Barron pulled up another screen, this time showing real-time market data. In the last 48 hours, Whitmore Industries stock has dropped 7%, while investment in decentralized AI platforms has risen 300%. And we're just getting started. A wave of gasps erupted from the audience. Several executives pulled out their phones to verify the numbers, only to find that Barron was telling the truth. For the first time in history, a major corporation was losing ground not to another company, but to an entire decentralized movement. And Barron Trump had just publicly exposed it. Lawrence Whitmore clenched his fists. "So what's your game, kid? What do you want?" he asked, his voice low and sharp. Barron tilted his head slightly. "I don't want anything, Mr. Whitmore. That's the difference between me and you. I'm not here to control the system. I'm here to rewrite it." The room erupted. The young Trump had just declared war on corporate monopoly, and the entire business world was watching. The ballroom was in chaos. Some CEOs were whispering urgently to their advisors. A few investors were already scrambling to buy into decentralized AI platforms before it was too late. Others sat in stunned silence, processing the reality that a teenager, Barron Trump, had just shaken the foundations of global business. And in the middle of it all sat Lawrence Whitmore, his face dark with frustration. For the first time in decades, he felt something he hadn't experienced since his early days as an entrepreneur. Uncertainty. He knew how to deal with competitors. He knew how to crush startups. But this was different. This wasn't a company he could buy out. This wasn't a single entity he could outmaneuver. This was an idea. And ideas were dangerous. Barron stood tall, unshaken by the pandemonium around him. "You see, Mr. Whitmore, the problem isn't technology. It's the way people like you use it," he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "You build AI to replace workers. We build AI to empower them. You use automation to maximize profits. We use automation to create opportunities. You hoard power. We distribute it." He turned to the audience. "And here's what you all need to understand. This isn't a prediction. It's already happening." The screen behind him flickered again, now displaying a live heat map of global AI development. Bright blue dots pulsed across the world, representing thousands of independent AI projects, decentralized platforms, and blockchain-powered innovations. These weren't just concepts. They were real. "The difference between your generation and mine," Barron continued, "is that you built walls around technology. We're tearing them down." A deep silence filled the room. Even Whitmore was at a loss for words. Then, from the back of the room, someone clapped. One person, then another. and another. Within seconds, half the room was on its feet, applauding. Not just young entrepreneurs and disruptors, but billionaires, CEOs, and investors who understood what was happening. They weren't just witnessing a shift in power. They were seeing the future unfold in real time. Whitmore's jaw tightened as he watched members of his own circle nodding in approval at Barron's words. This wasn't supposed to happen. This kid, he muttered under his breath. This damn kid. He knew right then and there, this wasn't the last time he'd cross paths with Barron Trump. As the applause thundered through the ballroom, Barron Trump remained composed. He didn't bask in the moment, didn't smile smugly like someone who had just embarrassed one of the richest men in the world. Because this wasn't about winning an argument. This was about changing the game forever. Slowly, the clapping died down, and the room fell into an intense, anticipatory silence. Every person present, every billionaire, every CEO, every policymaker was waiting to hear what Barron would say next. He took a deep breath and scanned the audience. I didn't come here to start a war with the old system, he said finally. But let's be honest. Your system doesn't work anymore. And you know it. He gestured toward the screen, still displaying the global AI revolution. Technology isn't the problem. It's the mindset behind it. The old way of thinking, where power is hoarded by a few, where innovation is controlled by corporations, where industries thrive at the cost of people, that era is ending. He turned back to Whitmore. You said earlier that business is about profit, not sentiment. But what if I told you that in the next 10 years, the most successful companies won't be the ones that just chase profit? They'll be the ones that earn trust, that empower people, that give them a stake in the future. Whitmore's face was unreadable, but Barron could see it in his eyes. He wasn't dismissing him anymore. He was calculating, analyzing, trying to figure out his next move. And here's where you have a choice, Mr. Whitmore, Barron continued. You can keep fighting to control a world that's already moving past you, or you can evolve, adapt, actually lead in a way that benefits everyone, not just the top 1%. He let the words sink in. Then he dropped his final bombshell. Because make no mistake, whether you choose to be part of this change or not, it's happening. The next revolution isn't coming. He took one last look around the room. It's already here. With that, Barron Trump stepped away from the podium. The room was silent for a few seconds. Then, for the first time in history, the world's wealthiest and most powerful individual stood up and applauded a 19-year-old. Not because he was a Trump. Not because he had humiliated a billionaire. But because he had just outlined the future of global business, and they knew he was right. As Barron walked off the stage, Whitmore watched him with an expression of grudging respect. He had underestimated him, and now he had a choice to make, because whether he liked it or not, Barron Trump had just changed everything. Whitmore Industries stock plummeted 15%. Meanwhile, decentralized AI projects saw an explosion of investment, with billions pouring into blockchain-driven initiatives overnight. And as the world scrambled to catch up, one thing became clear. This was only the beginning, because Barron Trump wasn't just a name anymore. He was a movement, and the business world would never be the same again.